Have you ever been told you're a little needy or maybe clingy? Or maybe you've heard the opposite and been told that you're a little emotionally unavailable. Both of these are signals that you may have an insecure attachment style. That's exactly what we're talking about today is attachment styles and how they're impacting your relationships and your sex life, even if you're having casual sex. We're going to cover each attachment style and how you can become more secure in your attachment style. Ladies and gents, I'm Brandon the Dom, and let's get started. Let's first answer what an attachment style is. When we're a child, this is the first time that we recognize that we're imperfect beings and we have needs, and we need to have those needs fulfilled, and because we're a child, we can't do it ourselves. And this means that we start asking our parents or caregivers, whoever was taking care of us as a child, to fulfill those needs, right? They're the parents, they're the ones that can make stuff happen. Now, depending on how your parents approached and reacted to when you had needs as a child, which is a totally normal thing to do, you learn to either become securely attached or insecurely attached. A secure attachment is basically developed when your parents are attuned, responsive, and do the best they can to satisfy all your needs. And of course, providing you with a warm and nurturing environment. Those are the ideal parents. An insecure attachment is developed when parents do not meet those needs or react to those needs in a way that's not good for your development. And this may be caused by misattuned parenting, childhood trauma, or abuse of some sort. And roughly about a third of the US population has an insecure attachment style. However, I'm going to allude to when I'm describing the attachment styles that even the people that are labeled securely attached, they most likely have some elements of these other insecure attachment styles, just because each of us are imperfect beings. If we were completely secure, we wouldn't have needs. We wouldn't need to have anybody else fulfill those. But none of us are perfect. And so by knowing some of the insecure attachment styles, you can recognize some of the areas that you may need to still work towards security in yourself. Now, the behaviors that we learn as a child from our parents either responding to our needs or responding negatively or not responding at all to our needs, those become behavior patterns that we continue into adulthood when we're asking for our needs to be met and trying to get somebody in another relationship to fulfill those needs. And unfortunately, if we learned maladaptive behaviors as a child and never took the time to correct them, we're going to continue those maladaptive behaviors as an adult. So now let's dive into the 4 types of attachment styles. The 4 types of attachment styles are secure, anxious, or sometimes referred to as preoccupied, avoidant, or sometimes referred to as dismissive, and disorganized, which is kind of a combination between anxious and avoidant. You have elements of both. So let's first start with a secure attachment and describe what that looks like in the most ideal world, and then see what goes wrong when we go with the other insecure attachment styles. So the first attachment style is secure. The most simple way to state security within yourself is you're okay with yourself, you're okay with others, and you're okay with the relationship between you and others. Basically, whatever goes on, you're going to be okay. This breaks down into you basically have a positive view of yourself. You can reassure yourself, and you don't need too much validation or reassurance from other people. You feel that it's okay to exist. You feel that it's okay that you're loved, and you're worth having your needs met. Now, this doesn't mean that you reject intimacy or don't want to have relationships because you can fulfill your needs. Instead, it means you're okay in a relationship and you're okay outside of a relationship. Either way, you're going to be okay. Being secure also means that you have a positive view of others because you don't need to be tearing them down in order to make yourself feel better. And you're not also trying to elevate those people above you and saying that you're unworthy. You trust others, you openly share yourself and be vulnerable with them. You share your emotions, you ask for needs and desires to be fulfilled, and you can easily form long-lasting relationships, romantic connections, and feel that it's easy to be loved and to love others. That's the most ideal world. That's what a secure attachment basically looks like. The way that this is developed as a child is basically your parents, when you started asking for your needs to be met, did this in a very attuned way to make you feel certain feelings when your needs are being fulfilled. You basically have a trust in your parents that when something goes wrong and you have a need, that they're going to fulfill it. And The ideal parents basically never broke that trust. What they did was always made you feel safe. They made you feel seen and known. They made you feel comforted. They made you feel valued. And you felt that you had support for being your best self. Not what your parents wanted, but what you wanted to be as a person. And if you got all of those feelings as a child, when you stepped into being an adult and started having relationships, you're less likely to worry about yourself or about the status of your relationship. If it's going to suddenly end or if it's going to continue, keep going. You have a lot of trust in yourself and you had a lot of trust in other people. It also means you can thrive on your own, fulfill your own needs, but you can also thrive in a relationship and be able to ask for your needs and desires fulfilled there. You're okay either way. Now, how this specifically shows up in your sex life is you're bringing the security in being okay with yourself and you're okay with the other partner. What that looks like is you're okay giving and receiving touch. You can do either of them. You're comfortable experimenting in the bedroom and not having a lot of shame or guilt around those types of things. You're comfortable expressing your emotions during sex and allowing that to be a part of the experience. And you're comfortable asking for your needs and desires to be fulfilled. If you're secure, you're also less likely to use sex as a manipulation tool or to try and feed your own ego because you don't need that validation. You're enjoying the experience for what it is. That's the most ideal world. And if you're anything like me, you probably didn't start off that way. And you might have some of these other attachment styles. So we're going to jump into those now of when your parents didn't fully meet your needs, they weren't the most ideal parents, what may occur and how those are showing up in your relationship. So the second attachment style is anxious preoccupied. And this is basically if you've ever been told that you're a little needy or a little clingy, probably have an anxious attachment style. And that anxiousness stems from having a negative view of yourself, but a positive view of other people. You basically put other people above you all the time. You're often highly attuned to those needs of the other people, because if you're not attuned to those needs and you do something wrong, you're afraid they're going to remove their validation or remove their love. So you do everything you can in order to please those people and not have the relationship end. If you have an anxious attachment style, you probably also need a lot of reassurance that you're loved. You need to hear that on an ongoing basis, a lot more than other people do. You need to hear that you're worthy, that you're good enough, all because your deepest fear is being abandoned. They're going to leave you if you're not good enough or if you're not loved enough. And so this fear leads you to be desperate, clingy, doing behaviors in order to people please them, maybe even being run over in relationships. The way this developed is as a child, your parents were basically inconsistent about meeting your needs. Sometimes they did, and sometimes they didn't. And oftentimes you tried to read their emotions or read their behaviors to try and figure out what's the puzzle here? How do I actually get my needs met? If I do this certain thing for my parents, they're going to meet my needs. And so I need to keep doing that thing. But oftentimes this is hard to do because your parents weren't meeting your need because of something that you did. And so you kind of develop this misattuned pattern of trying to read emotions, but you're not reading the correct signals. And as a result, you start to develop anxiety about the uncertainty. Like, I don't know how I'm going to get my needs met in the future. And that causes a lot of anxiety. Why? Because if we don't have our needs met, there's a possibility that we die. And that would cause anybody anxiety. And you also start to question if your parents, the people that are supposed to be taking care of you, actually love and care for you. So how does this show up as an adult in your relationships? Well, this probably means that you fall in love easily, but you're hyper vigilant to the security of that relationship. Does that person actually love me? Are they going to leave me? And you're constantly trying to fulfill that need, that hole in your chest that you have of being approved, being worthy, being enough. You probably have a deep insecurity of, am I enough as a person? And on the other hand, you probably also feel quite underappreciated by the people around you, right? Because they're not saying it enough that they care about you, that they appreciate you, that they like the things that you're doing. And most of all, depending on whatever your partner's emotion is, you take it to a level 10, you overread it, you get clingy, and you depend on your partner's positive emotions to feel cared for, loved, and ultimately secure. Now, in your sex life, this can be quite insidious, right? You're already anxious about your worthiness, about your position in the relationship. And so you use sex as a tool to gain approval about your worth as a person gain your approval about your attractiveness. And when you're doing this, sometimes sex becomes a tool for manipulation. You're trying to provoke your partner's attention, availability, and care. If I give them sex, they will care for me. And you're also trying to use it as a tool to get approval or reassurance or closeness with that other person. And you're more likely to overstep your own boundaries in sex, doing things that maybe you didn't actually want to do, but you thought if you did it, it would please your partner and they would care and love for you and not leave. That's the anxious attachment style. The other side of this coin is the avoidant dismissive attachment style. So if you've ever been told that you're kind of cold or unavailable, people don't know what's going on inside that head of yours, there's a good chance that you have an avoidant attachment style. And this attachment style basically stems from having a very positive self-view, but not a very high view of other people. You most likely do not want to depend on other people, have other people depend on you, or seek any type of approval in relationships. Oftentimes you avoid trying to show anybody your emotions or any true part of yourself. And you try and distance yourself from intimacy, especially if people are trying to give you more intimacy, the more you try and get away from it. And you don't want people getting too close, because if they do, they may end up hurting you or they may end up relying on you too much. So you keep your distance from them. How did this develop as a child? Well, you probably learned these behaviors from your parents, because when you reached out with some sort of need, reassurance as a child, they started to distance themselves. They felt your needs were too overwhelming and they didn't show any emotion. And so you learned that those are the proper behaviors. And the more that you asked as a child, became more emotional or asked for more things, the farther and farther and farther away your parent got. You may have also been shamed for showing your own emotions or for having needs. And you may have been told that you need to grow up, you need to be independent and serious, and the world doesn't give you what you want. You basically had to learn to fend for yourself. Now, avoidant attachment styles are pretty interesting when they show up as an adult, because honestly, our world kind of lets it be okay, kind of lets it be cultivated, because you're often very social, you're outgoing, you're fun to be around, and you're honestly kind of attractive, because neediness is not very attractive, right? So if there's somebody this person that doesn't have a lot of needs, is not overwhelming me with their emotions, that's kind of attractive. And so you probably developed a lot of friends and maybe even sexual partners. The problem is all of these people that are around you, you have very shallow connections with, because you haven't actually let them in. You haven't let them see who you are, haven't expressed your emotions, and haven't shown them that you're human just like everyone else who actually has needs. The closer that those friends and sexual partners actually try and get to you to try and build intimacy, the farther and farther away you try and get from them. And if they're really trying hard, you might go as far as sabotaging that relationship, consciously or unconsciously, so you don't have to get too close. That's probably pretty easy how this plays out in your sexual encounters, in your sex life. Sex is not something that's used to gain emotional intimacy with another person or get closer to another person. It's just a meaningless act that is done for the sake of biology, the sake of fun, just things that a couple people do. So more likely you're having one night stands and friends with benefits, but never serious long-term relationships. Oftentimes you're using sex as a tool to stroke your own ego. Remember, we have a positive view of ourselves and a negative view of others. And so you go on these sexual conquests and you get validation from them. You might also use it as a manipulation tool in order to control your partner. So using sex as a tool of intimacy, especially if they're an anxious type and get clingy and need that sex for intimacy, you may use that as a tool to control them and withdraw sex in order for them to do what you want. All right, the fourth and final type of attachment style is a combination of avoidant and of anxiousness. So this is often called disorganized or fearful avoidant. And if you've ever been told that you're kind of unpredictable or unstable and people don't know how to read you in a relationship, there's a good probability that you have a disorganized attachment style. And these inconsistent behaviors basically stem from a negative view of yourself and a negative view of other people. Both of those things, your relationship with yourself and the relationship with other people, are a source of desire. You want to have that relationship, but also a source of great fear. that if you do have that relationship, things are going to go terribly, terribly wrong. So you have both high avoidance and high anxiety. Not very awesome. There's times that you actually want to be intimate and close with other people, but you do not trust those other people and you don't trust that you can actually depend on them. You also probably struggle with identifying and regulating your own emotions. Your internal world is just as much chaos. Now, the way that this develops as a child is most often around some sort of trauma, where basically your parents went from being a source of care and love to being a source of fear. That if you engaged them with any type of emotion or need, there was going to be consequences, and those were going to be negative. Whether it was abuse or some other form of trauma, your parents became a source of fear. Your parents probably also observed erratic behavior, so you could not tell at all if you asked for something or you didn't ask for nothing, something, what their emotion, what their state was going to be. A really great example is this: if you're a child of a parents that had some sort of mental disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, where you could not figure out that if you did something or you didn't do something, what they were going to do. And oftentimes they were going to hurt you emotionally, physically, and it didn't matter what you did. That basically creates a state where you can't predict anything. So you become highly anxious and highly avoidant. And as a result of that, you basically stop trusting them entirely to meet your needs. And you'll see that this plays out as an adult. You don't trust anybody to meet your needs. There's nobody that's going to do that. However, you really, really want a relationship. You really want to be loved just like everyone else. And you never got to experience that as a child. So you really want it as an adult to be loved. You just can't trust anybody to actually let them in order to be able to show you that love, because you fear how much they're going to hurt you. The closer that people try and get, the more that you fear that they're going to hurt you. And every time that you enter in a relationship, you're kind of already starting off from a bad position because you expect disappointment to happen in the future. You expect the hurt to inevitably come. And so even if you start to fall in love with somebody, you have extreme passion and desire for that person, you often try and shut it down, because if you go down that road, there's going to be hurt at the end of it. In your sex life, it's just as chaotic. You're basically pursuing sex as a way to have connection with other people. However, it's often devoid of emotion, because if you showed emotion, there's a chance that you're going to get hurt. And depending on how sex feels to you when you're pursuing it, if you do get a tiny hit of connection there, there's the chance that you become addicted to sex and trying to pursue that all the time as the one source of being able to feel loved in some way. And being that you have both anxious attachment style and avoidant attachment style elements in there, you also may be pursuing it as a way to get validation from other people or to feed your own ego, that it's okay that you exist. So depending on where you kind of fall on this matrix here, you may be feeling a little down on yourself, especially if you have an anxious attachment style, avoidant attachment style, or a disorganized attachment style. Luckily for you, you can actually develop a secure attachment style as an adult. You're not stuck with the attachment style you developed as a child. So I'm going to give you some tools in order to help you develop towards a more secure attachment style. And this is something that I actually had to go through personally. I had a little bit of anxious and avoidant attachment styles. I wouldn't say I was all the way disorganized, but depending on the relationship I was having, who that relationship was with, would trigger certain things that would cause anxiety. And with other people, it would trigger certain things that would cause being avoidant. And that happened to stem from both of my parents when I was younger. They were divorced. And so I had sort of different relationships in different environments with each of them. And so I kind of learned behavioral patterns of being anxious and behavioral patterns of being avoidant. So I had to go through the process to become much more secure. And I can promise you that it is possible, and it's well worth going through that to get that sense that you're okay as a person, you're worthy as a person, and so are other people. Like, you're all on equal playing field and you all have needs, and it's totally normal to have needs, and no human is perfect. And you're worth having those needs met, and so are the other people. You can trust other people. It just feels a lot better to be in relationships when you're secure in yourself. So let's talk about some different things that you can do to become more secure in your attachment style. First off, I just want to give you this idea that no one ever can be 100% secure. Because a 100% secure person would be somebody that either has all their needs met all the time and they can most likely do it on their own. They're not going to need somebody else. Or they have no needs at all. And both of those states are not any human ever that's ever existed. So the closest we can do to getting more secure is finding strategies in order to meet our own needs or being able to openly express with other people to have those needs met. So the very first thing that is a world of help is getting educated about your attachment style, understanding what each attachment style is, how it developed, and most importantly, the things in life that you're going to come across that trigger the behaviors and reactions that you developed as a child. Because once you understand those triggers, you can identify them and then you can start doing other behaviors. And a trigger will happen. And instead of going down the normal path that you developed as a child unconsciously, you can consciously say, hey, I actually want to be this type of person. I want to be more secure. So I'm going to do this behavior. Now, obviously, you're watching this video, so you started to get a brief primer about the attachment styles, and that's excellent. A way that you can expand upon your knowledge is by going to the attachment project. I'll pull it up on the screen here. And basically, the attachment project has great resources on each one of the attachment styles. You can actually take a quiz here as well and go through a great set of questions that have been developed by psychologists to help you identify your attachment style and then maybe which resources you'll need. And I believe if I scroll down here, and they don't show it on here, they have actual workbooks and different courses. Actually, if I go here, just click at top B. So they have workbooks on each one of the attachment styles that are going to help you identify those triggers and ways that you can start to develop more positive behaviors around those. But they also have courses that you can start taking that has lots of psychologists kind of explaining it to you, and then practices and techniques and tools for you to use in order to develop a more secure attachment style. Now, the attachment project is a great way for you to get started on your own and start to identify some of these things. And maybe that's all that you need, depending on what your behaviors are and how ingrained they are. However, if you feel like you need some support, you need an outside perspective to help you start identifying these things and be able to give you some tools, attachment styles are a great thing to work out in therapy. I'm going to give you 3 different types of therapy tools or approaches that you can use in order to start becoming more secure. The first one is pretty self-explanatory. It's attachment therapy. And basically the website that I just showed you, the attachment project, is basically like your DIY attachment therapy. But most of the time, attachment therapy is done in some sort of talk therapy where you're starting to build a bond with your therapist. Your therapist starts to become a stand-in for what your parents were supposed to be as a child. You're developing a secure attachment with the therapist and using that as sort of a symbol, a cornerstone, if you will, when you go out into the real world, start developing relationships there of like, oh, this is what a secure relationship looks like. This is what a secure attachment looks like. So it gets modeled to you by the therapist, and then you go out into the real world and try and implement it into your other relationships. To help you find a therapist, the attachment project has a list of different places and different therapies that are associated with attachment therapy that you can use in order to find a therapist that works with attachment styles. As well as, I already showed you this, but if you go to the attachment repair course, this is basically your DIY version of the same type of therapy. The second tool I want to introduce you to is one that's a little newer, but highly, highly researched, and that is the ideal parent figure protocol. So the main difference between the ideal parent figure protocol and attachment therapy work is that in attachment therapy work, you're creating that ideal relationship with your therapist, and your therapist basically becomes the model, the stand-in for what your parents were supposed to be when you were younger, so that you have a good working version model in your head of what a secure attachment style looks like, and you're able to go implement that in real life. With the ideal parent figure protocol, you're creating ideal parents inside your head. And so when you're out and about in the real world and something happens, some sort of trigger comes up in a relationship, you often have these memories that you go access about like, oh, this experience has happened before. And I learned as a child that you react to it in this way. I become avoidant or I become anxious. Um, with the ideal parent figure protocol, you're basically creating new memories with ideal parents. So these are, um, you know, idealized parents that are separate from the parents that you had as a child, and creating a secure attachment to that so that when you go out in the real world and a trigger happens, you start going to those memories of being very secure, of feeling safe and seen and known, like you can be your best self, and you access those and you start doing those behaviors rather than the misattuned behaviors that you learned as a child. The ideal parent figure protocol comes from the 3-pillar method, which was developed by Dan Brown and David Elliott at Harvard. So this is highly researched. It comes from, I believe 50 to 70 years worth of research in attachment styles. And their claim is basically this is the only way to fully heal your insecure attachment style. Personally, this is what I used. I used it in combination with some other psychotherapy tools and actually some different philosophies between Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy. But this was probably the core thing that finally, brought it all together. And I could come out the other side and say, yes, I feel very secure in who I am and feel worthy. I feel other people are worthy and am able to have secure relationships. But basically what this is a meditation or a guided visualization. And what you're being guided to do is imagine these ideal parents who are separate from your other parents. You're not imagining your old parents, doing these activities. You're imagining entirely new set of parents. These are the ideal beings in your mind. And they're basically going to help you to feel those 5 things in secure attachment that I talked about before. So these ideal parents are going to make you feel safe. They're going to make you feel seen and known. They're going to make you feel comforted. They're going to make you feel valued. And they're going to make you feel like you're supported to be your best self. That's what you were supposed to get as a child. So when you do this meditation on these guided visualizations, your ideal parents are now giving you those things. You kind of imagine yourself as a child receiving those things. I'm going to leave a link in the description of this YouTube video to my article, because my article has all the links in order to start doing this process on your own. You can actually DIY it, which is what I did. And I leave links to a Reddit post that gives a great explanation of this stuff. And then the video and 10-minute guided visualization that I did with this. There's also a book that's specifically written for psychotherapists to start doing this in their practices. However, if you're like me, like to do a little, DIY on yourself, I often read psychotherapy textbooks in order to do some of these things. And that's what I did in order to personalize the meditation to myself. The one that I link to in my article is basically a general guided visualization. And it's done actually by Dan Brown. So it's very good to do generalized. But if you start identifying your own personal triggers and the ways that you may be anxious or the ways that you may be avoidant, you can actually personalize the meditation for yourself to work on those specific parts. So the book will help you to do that. But I also linked to a library of meditations that have been made by other people that have some of those elements. You can personalize the meditation for yourself. Now, that's for you to be able to do it on your own. This is actually kind of difficult to do on your own because you need to both do the visualization and identify what you need to be working on. And depending on how self-aware you are, that may be easy or may be difficult. So I recommend working with a therapist in order to do this. I left a link there to a therapist that are specifically trained in the ideal protocol. However, you can also work with coaches that have been using this protocol or used it with other people. And I happen to be one of those people. So if you want to work with a coach, maybe depending on some of the other areas of your life, in your sex and relationships, that might be a little alternative. And, we talk about BDSM and Dom sub relationships here on this channel. So if those are part of your relationship dynamics, then you may want to work with me as opposed to some of the therapists, just because they may not be keen to that lifestyle yet. However, like I said, I left a link to other people that are trained in this and would highly recommend working with them if this is something that you want to pursue. Having done it myself, I highly, highly recommend the ideal parent figure protocol. It's excellent. And definitely helped me move to be more secure. The last tool I want to recommend to you guys is internal family systems. And this has gained quite a bit of popularity, probably in the last decade or so. And I have actually quite a few friends that have done IFS. But basically, IFS is another form of talk therapy in which you are identifying and basically understanding these sub personalities that make up the whole of you or your personality. So, great way to visualize this is picture you and then picture a bunch of little yous in your head. And each one of those little yous have needs and desires and emotions and things that come up. And so, if you've ever talked to somebody and said, part of me feels like this and part of me feels like this is a good tool to kind of work through those things. Now, the reason that you're trying to identify these little yous, these sub personalities, is because each one of them have their own wounds and painful emotions that need to be worked through. And if you're able to basically work with the parts, the idea is that the whole will be more healed. And when you're doing this with a therapist, your therapist basically helps you identify the subpersonalities, helps you identify the emotions that the subpersonality has, gives you strategies to work through that with your subpersonality, and ultimately move to positive ways to manage conflicts and emotions going on. Now, although this is not something that's marketed directly to address attachment styles, if you're somebody that specifically has a disorganized attachment style where it feels like part of you wants love and part of you wants to avoid this, and it feels like chaos in your head, IFS is actually a great thing to work with in combination of attachment therapy because you're able to kind of address both of those sides. You can work on the side that's a little more anxious and you can work on the side that's a little more avoidant. Just like I did with the other therapy tools, I left a link inside the article to where you can find therapists that are certified in IFS. So any one of those therapy tools I recommend, find somebody that's certified in this, has worked with people using these tools, and get some help basically working through what your attachment style is. Now, the last part about how to become more securely attached is to basically practice what you've learned, practice the new behaviors. So the reason that you are always doing the old behaviors that you learned as a child is because you have basically practiced that for years from being a child all the way up to yourself now as an adult. So it's very easy for you to go into those patterns. So for you to practice the more positive behaviors that you want to do to be more secure, you need to do them over and over again until it becomes basically the default option. Your brain's like, okay, there's two lanes here. I can do the behaviors I learned as a child. I can do these new ones. And, we've been having some positive outcomes in our life. Our relationships are better. I like when we do this outcome. And you basically want your brain to keep choosing that. So in order to do that, you have to practice it. I recommend practicing this in relationship with yourself, in relationships with others, and in your sex life. So in your relationship with yourself, you should practice holding yourself in high regard, that you're worthy, of having your needs met, and you're worthy of being loved. And I'm just going to pause here for a moment and let you feel that, because we don't often get told that very much. You're worthy of being here. You're worthy of having your needs met, and you're worthy of feeling loved. And the way you practice this is basically acknowledging you have needs and you need to have those needs fulfilled, either on your own or by asking others to fulfill those needs. So you become an advocate for yourself. And sometimes it's telling yourself, hey, I need to take a moment here and fulfill my own needs. Or you're open enough to speak with others about what those needs are and ask if they're willing to fulfill them. And the reason that this is important, starting with yourself, is because this is going to be the most deep connection you will ever have. It's going to be the longest lasting connection you will ever have. You will never escape yourself. So please take the time to develop a positive relationship with yourself. Next, when you're practicing in relationships with other people, you want to extend that same love that you gave yourself to them as well. They're worthy of having needs and they're worthy of being loved. And something that happens when you start doing this, you said to yourself, I'm worthy of being here. I'm worthy of having needs and I'm worthy of being loved. And you also say, they're worthy of having needs. They're worthy of being here. They're worthy of being loved. Is that you and that other person are not really that different. You guys have the same basic needs and you guys both want to be loved. You're going to develop a lot of empathy for yourself and for other people. But the way this is practiced is you have to be open with them. You're going to share yourself, your needs, your emotions, the inner parts of you, and you're going to accept them when they share themselves. You're basically going to give and receive love freely, flows in and out. There's no blocks. And you'll trust that other people will help to meet you. And you'll trust that other people are going to help to meet your needs, and you're going to help meet their needs. It's a give and take relationship. And when you're practicing this relationship with yourself and you're practicing these new relationships with others in your sex life, sex is no longer a tool of manipulation, of validation, or trying to seek some control over the other person. Sex is ultimately a tool of expressing intimacy between you two, the connection that you two have. Sex is honestly one of the most intimate things that you can do with another person. And so when you're secure, when you're having sex, you're able to express yourself sexually, emotionally, doing that all very freely and accepting when the other people are doing that with you. And when you're doing this, sex becomes wonderful. It's full of emotion and passion instead of being stuck in your head about worrying, about having anxiety, and it becomes one of the most enjoyable expressions of your relationship. So if being more secure and living that kind of life where you have a positive relationship with yourself, you have a positive relationship with other people, and you have a positive sex life full of great expression and emotion and enjoying everything there is between the intimacy of two people, but you feel like you have an insecure attachment style at the moment, I would love to jump on a call with you and see if we can't start some sort of coaching to help you move in towards having a more secure relationship. I offer a free session. You can find the link for that in the description. We'll jump on a call, see where you are now, start to develop a plan to help you become more secure. And specifically, if you're interested in the ideal parent figure protocol, that's something I went through personally and can help lead you through as well. So again, you can find the link for that in the description below, and I look forward to getting on a call and meeting you. As always, thank you so much for your time and attention.